So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 144, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Spencer Rascoff. So, Spencer has some really incredible experience as a co founder of marketplaces like Hotwire, Zillow, where he was a CEO for over 10 years, and more recently, Pacaso. So, Spencer has also been on the board of notable companies like TripAdvisor and is also an active angel investor in over 75 startups. So this is a really incredible chat with Spencer where we got to learn more about his earlier experience building Hotwire, how he initially started Zillow, some of the biggest challenges and learnings from his time running it as a CEO, how he's more recently started Pacaso, discuss some of the biggest mistakes that founders make when building marketplaces in real estate and housing. We also had a great group Q&A. So I really enjoyed this conversation and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Spencer, welcome to the group chat. This is a real treat to have you join us here today. So I'd like to start off by saying, huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So you have some really incredible experience building marketplaces that we all know of today, like Zillow. So I'm excited to learn more about it and really dive into things here with you. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing your background, though, for those that might not know you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in LA, actually. I lived in New York till I was 12, and then I moved out here. I went to Harvard Westlake in high school. Here in LA, and then went to Harvard College, and then started my career in investment banking at Goldman Sachs. Did my time as an investment banker. Wasn't really for me. Happy to talk about that if you want. But I did 2 years in banking, and then moved to San Francisco to work at a private equity firm called TPG. And also private equity wasn't really for me. So first startup was Hotwire, which maybe we'll talk about. Sold that to Expedia after about 4 years. Moved up to Seattle to work at Expedia. And at Expedia, I ran the hotel business for about a year or two, and then thought it was time for a change and left to start Zillow. Did that for about 15 years, and then retired from Zillow, moved back here to LA about 4 years ago, and started 75 and Sunny Ventures, which is my family office and startup studio. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that if we have time.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an incredible background, and definitely has so much that we're going to get into, with each company. But I guess, kind of going back to the beginning though, what led you to starting a Hotwire, and maybe what were like some of those kind of early days like?
Yeah, so I mean, I started Hotwire when I was 23 and didn't know anything, and it was going really well for the first 2 years. So 99 to 2001, Hotwire was growing. We got up to about 200 employees. We'd raised about 75 million of venture capital. And we were one of the early leaders of online travel and had this huge tailwind at our back from the migration from offline travel to online travel as people were just discovering the internet and starting to book travel online. And then 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened September 11th, 2001. And obviously, terrible tragedy for the country. 3,000 Americans were killed. 4 planes were hijacked, started 2 wars, and changed the whole trajectory of the next 25 years. For Hotwire, for our little travel startup, it was also pretty terrible. And it was terrible for a couple of reasons. Firstly, our customers were stranded. We had tens of thousands of passengers around the world that weren't able to travel because planes were grounded for, I think it was 11 days after 9/11. And secondly, we had tens of millions of refund requests because we sold a non-refundable product, and a lot of people were afraid to travel for the next 6 or 12 months. And so we had a huge problem dealing with the core business. And then finally, we had sold tickets to the hijackers, not the September 11th flights, but the September 10th tickets from Bangor, Maine to Boston Logan that put the Boston cell in position. And only my co-founder and I knew that. The FBI called us the afternoon of September 11th and started asking questions about that. We never shared that with the company, and I didn't actually start sharing it publicly till a couple of years ago after 20 years had passed. But I mentioned that because as a founder, there was this terrible, palpable sense of guilt and obviously grief, but also connection to the 9/11 tragedy that just added to the depths of depression at the company. And then finally, for me personally, I was on the flight from Newark to SFO on September 10th, the flight that would end up crashing in the field in Pennsylvania, because I spoke at the Millennium Hilton on September 9th at a travel conference. And so I was just spared from 9/11 by a day. And the Millennium Hilton was crushed by one of the Twin Towers that fell on it. So it was a tough time. And we had to figure shit out like founders do. And, what we did was we did what all of you did through COVID and what many of you did through the financial crisis of 2008. And maybe if some of you are old like me, maybe what some of you did through 9/11, which is you manage your company through that crisis. In our case, we did a layoff. We went from about 200 people to 150 people. We cut quickly and deeply, and with the goal of trying to make it a one and done layoff, which it was, fortunately. We did our down round, which was a $20 million down round, which was really painful. Nowadays, we have this great euphemism, which is, it has structure. Back then, they hadn't invented that euphemism. Back then, it just felt really painful, and it wiped out most of the common equity of the company. And then most importantly, we got everybody fired up again, and we kind of reconnected the survivors to the mission and reminded them why they were there, reminded them what we were there to accomplish. And by 2 years later, the company was doing well again, and we were on our way, and we ended up selling for $700 million to Expedia, which was great, except for that down round that I mentioned, which wiped out most of the common equity. Made for that exit not as attractive to the founders or the employees, but very attractive to the VCs. At any rate, so that was 99 to 03, Mike, and I learned a lot. It made me a much better founder for my next couple companies, but it was a pretty trial by fire period of my founder story.
Yeah, I know. Certainly, it sounds like it. No, definitely some transformative experiences as well. So what do you think some of your key learnings were from Hotwire? And maybe how did this shape how you thought about starting Zillow?
Biggest learnings were, it's a cliche, but it's all about the team. So I think there's still sort of this myth of the brilliant software engineer that's like sitting in a dark room coding by themselves. Like, that's not real life. That's not startups. Every success, every failure is about the group of people. So recruit, retain, motivate great people, connect them to a mission, and then great people properly motivated build great products that attract audience, that generate revenue, profit, and market cap. So it all starts with the people, and making sure that you have the right people on the bus at the right time is something that I learned at Hotwire, and then I took to Zillow and elsewhere, because there's just a lot of inertia at companies where people show up every day because they worked at the company yesterday, and so of course they're going to be there today. That's not necessarily what a company needs, especially one going through crisis or one going through a scaling period or just any period of volatility up or down. And so being really intentional about who's on the bus at different points in time, and how do you motivate them, and how do you maintain a sense of mission through those challenging times. That was the biggest learning from the Hotwire experience. I guess if there were a second one, it would also be, and this is obviously a marketplace conversation and a marketplace group, but these two-sided marketplace businesses are all about trying to solve a problem for both sides. So what Hotwire did really well was we solved the problem for travelers that were looking for great discounts, but we most importantly solved the problem for the suppliers, the airlines, hotels, and rental car companies that were trying to sell distressed inventory, perishable inventory, right? A hotel room is totally perishable. An airline ticket is totally perishable. The minute the plane takes off, that ticket was worthless. So they can't have, low occupancy is just crushes travel suppliers. And so we created this product of selling distressed inventory behind a brand shield, or what they call in the travel industry an opaque or a product with opacity, which means that you don't know the name of the hotel, you don't know the name of the airline, you don't know if it's a nonstop or one stop, you don't know the departure time until after you buy it. And that was a really valuable product for airline, hotel, and rental car suppliers. And it solved a really important business challenge they have. It's really like an outlet mall. It's like a digital outlet mall. The reason that outlet malls exist is it lets clothing brands sell distressed inventory without diluting the brand, without trading down their core customer who's willing to walk into Rodeo Drive and pay full price, or go to Neiman Marcus and pay full price, but they have to sell their excess inventory. So they do it through outlet malls. So this is an online outlet mall. And solving that problem for those suppliers was really valuable, and that allowed us to create a great product experience for consumers.
Glad we got into the marketplace specific one. So yeah. So kind of transitioning over to Zillow though, what was the founding story of Zillow, and maybe what were some of the kind of first steps that you actually took to start it as a marketplace?
When it was time to leave Expedia after a year and a half, my co-founders were early Expedia folks, and we sat in a room for about 3 months and tried to come up with a startup idea. I don't know if that's how most startups are hatched. That's how Zillow was hatched. And like what is common about most good startup ideas is it's born out of some personal need, some personal challenge. And so at the time, we were doing two things personally, all three of us, and then a fourth and fifth that joined us shortly after, also from Expedia. We were firstly buying homes, and I had just gotten married. I was buying my first house, and we were building mashups of King County, which is the county that Seattle is in, King County data from the King County website, Google Maps data, and then a friend of ours had given us access to MLS data. And so we were kind of like sort of hacking together something that would sort of eventually look a little bit more like Zillow. And we were like, well, this is really illuminating, being able to see all this great data and being able to build spreadsheets with comps and do analysis ourselves. Like, that's empowering. And then we were also doing this other thing, which is we were editing files and family photos on hard drives. So take yourself back here to 2005. There was no cloud, there were no smartphones, but there were these physical hard drives that we all had back then. And we had all been working for 15 years or so, and we had digital cameras, and you would take digital photos and they would go onto your hard drive. And so we were like editing and cleaning all these photos and moving them from one machine at home to a machine at work, whatever. And this other business plan, like what was behind, door B, was basically Dropbox. And Dropbox didn't exist, Box didn't exist, AWS didn't exist, Azure didn't exist. But the observation was that moving files from one machine to another was sort of a really big problem that consumers have, and there was going to be more and more data. Businesses were going to have this problem, and maybe there was something there. We decided not to do that idea because we thought eventually the internet giants would provide storage for free or near free to get companies and people into their ecosystem. And we were right. I mean, this is AWS, this is Azure, this is Google Cloud. And that it would really be a race to the bottom on pricing because the giants would offer it all for at a subsidized rate. We were right about that. We were, of course, wrong about the companies. We thought it would be like eBay and PayPal and Yahoo. Like nobody could foresee Amazon. They were selling books and DVDs at the time. And Google was a search engine, and nobody thought Microsoft would ever enter this space. Again, the space didn't even exist. So that's why we didn't choose the cloud idea, and we chose the real estate idea. And it was a good one.
Certainly. And I guess kind of like in that, in the very beginning, as marketplaces, we all face the kind of the chicken and the egg, right? Or the kind of cold start problem. So, how did you kind of solve for that?
We solved for that with the Zestimate. And the Zestimate was this idea that we had. Well, let me back up. So we're like, okay, we should build a real estate product, a real estate website of some sort. It'll provide information transparency. It'll empower consumers with access to this information, which is hidden behind secret databases at the county courthouse, in the MLS, in consumers or real estate professionals' brains, and will provide information transparency. And then we said, well, okay, what's the most important question that everybody asks about real estate? And the way most websites at the time, this was 2005, there were plenty of real estate websites at the time. The question they were all answering was, what's for sale? Every single one, Realtor.com, every website at the time was answering what's for sale. And we're like, well, that's interesting. But the question that most people ask themselves is not actually what's for sale. It's what's my house worth? And there were lead gen sites at the time that would say, what's my house worth? In fact, House Values was a publicly traded company that would have TV ads that would say, go to housevalues.com and we'll tell you what your house is worth. You go to housevalues.com, you'd enter your address and hit submit. And then it would say a real estate agent will call you to tell you what your house is worth. So it was lead gen to real estate agents to tell you what your house was worth. And so, I still remember we were in a high rise in downtown Seattle. We were looking across at Queen Anne, which is a residential neighborhood kind of across the lake. And we were like, imagine if you had goggles, like superpowers, like godlike goggles. There was no VR, AR, Oculus, Snap spectacles. None of that existed yet. We're like, what if you could put on these glasses and you could like see a price on every rooftop, and you could see all this, like you could look into the houses and see on every single house, not just the ones that are for sale, but every house. That would be really cool and voyeuristic and incredible and illuminating and traffic generating. And so we said, okay, to do that, we need to figure out what every house is worth. That seems really hard. And so we called this guy, Stan Humphreys, who ran analytics at Expedia. and worked for us at Expedia. And we're like, hey, we finally figured out what we're going to do. It's been 3 months. We've been sitting in this conference room, editing family photos. And like, we're going to try to figure out what every house in the country is worth. It's time to leave Expedia and join us. And he's like, I don't know anything about real estate. And we said, well, neither do we. Like, this isn't about real estate. This is a math problem. This is just simple. Well, not so simple. It's a pretty complicated math problem, but it's a math problem. It's not a real estate problem. And we're going to figure out what every house is worth. And he said, okay, fine. So he joined. And then we did a $6 million pre-seed round from the founders, from us. Remember that down round I mentioned at Hotwire? When we sold Hotwire for $700 million, I made $1 million. And I was the co-founder. And with that $1 million, I bought a $700,000 house, or $650,000 house, or $650,000 down payment on an $800,000 house. And with the other $350,000 that I made from Hotwire, I put it into the pre-seed round at Zillow. So I just, put it all on, bet it all on black. And actually, that's a bad metaphor, because that would make it sound like there's a 48% chance of success. I bet it all on like 00. And put the 350 into the pre-seed round at Zillow. And we raised $6 million from the rest of us. My co-founders each did $2.5 million. They had more money than I did from their Expedia experience. And then the other couple employees did the rest. And so we did $6 million pre-seed. We spent a couple months buying data and building algorithms to try to value every home in the country. And when we launched February 2006, we had 40 million Zestimates. So that was about half the country, with a 14% error rate, meaning that every time a home is sold, the Zestimate was about 14% off on average. So 40 million Zestimates, 14% error. Fast forward 15 years later, today Zillow has 100 million Zestimates. So basically every home in the country at a 4% error rate. And on homes that are for sale, it's about a 2% error rate. So the Zestimate went from 14% wrong to 2 to 4% wrong over the 15 years that I was CEO. And the way that it did that was through AI and machine learning and computer vision. And we can talk about that if you want, but 15 years of just the algorithm improving and us improving it and it improving itself. But to answer your question briefly, Mike, the answer on the cold start problem was the Zestimate. When we launched, we had 1 million users on day one. We had 4 million users in month one. That's still the fastest launch of any product, including ChatGPT. They didn't have 1 million users on day one. Faster than Snap, faster than Instagram, faster than WhatsApp. And, and by the way, it took 2 years to get back to that first month traffic. So huge spike, 4 million UUs in month one, which is only a 3-week month. And then it took 2 years of the grind to get us back to where we were on month one. So I guess we didn't really solve the cold start problem. We had a very hot start, and then it became lukewarm, and it took 2 years to get it back to where it was.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to hear. Going back to the early days, since of course we all know Zillow today, and that sense of scale it's at. So we could probably have an entire chat just on Zillow and really diving into things. But could you briefly walk us through what some of the pivotal moments were for it as a business?
Let's see. There were so many. I guess one is obviously the launch. I think the next one was when we figured out what the right ad product was going to be. So we had a lot of traffic. We had 10, 15 million uniques. We then added listings. By the way, people forget this. There were no listings on Zillow of homes for sale for the first 2 years. 06 to 08, no listings. Just Zestimates, evaluations, bed, bath square footage, prior sale history, just publicly available data plus the Zestimate, no listings. So we got to the 4th or 5th most visited real estate site, and then we added listings in the financial crisis in 08. So that was an inflection point. And then the next one was when we figured out how to make money. So we had all these different ad products that we were messing around with, display ad, a lead gen ad, et cetera. And the company really took off once we pivoted to mobile. And we pivoted to mobile. I still remember, actually I don't remember the year. It was probably 2011 maybe. But I remember sitting at my computer watching Steve Jobs demo at WWDC demo. The iPhone had been out for about 6 months, but he demoed the App Store. And he said, in about 6 months, we're going to add apps to this iPhone that, nobody had yet. And at the time, the iPhone only had Apple apps. It had mail, stocks, weather, and that was basically it. It had no apps. And I remember I stood up from my desk. I ran to my co-founder's desk, 15 feet away. I said, we have to pivot the whole company to mobile. Like, real estate shopping is the ultimate mobile experience. It's when you're driving around untethered from your desk, looking at homes in the field that you want Zillow in the power of your hand. we should pivot to mobile. And he's like, yeah, I agree. And so by the end of the week, we had changed the name of the company literally from Zillow.com to Zillow, like literally, like everywhere officially, and then everywhere it's email address and blah, blah, blah. By the end of the week, I had declared that if I was in any product meeting or any meeting of any kind and anyone showed me desktop screenshots before mobile screenshots, I would get up and walk out of the room and the meeting would be over. I only had to do that twice. And after the second time, everyone got the message and they realized that we were a mobile first company. And within like a month, we had pivoted like everything to mobile. And then, to show you the dividends that it paid, when the iPad launched a year or two later, Apple reached out to us 6 months ahead of time and asked us to build the first real estate iPad app in secret. We had one iPad in a windowless room, locked, and only 6 people. Actually, I didn't see it. This is actually an interesting story. We only had, I think it was 6 or maybe 4 like named people that were allowed to see the iPad and work on building the first iPad app. And I was like, well, don't bother with me. I don't write code. Like, I'm the CEO, but like, I don't even want to be on the, one of the 4. If we only have 4, we should choose them wisely. So I never even saw the iPad for those 6 months. I knew it was in the room, but I couldn't see it. And there were no windows in the room. It was in like a utility closet, basically, where those 4 engineers just went in there every day and then like buzzed in and out of it. Anyway, so we pivoted the company to mobile. That was instrumental. The next one was the ad product. So when we figured out that the mobile app product where you can connect to a real estate agent by text or voice, that worked, and how to sell that. And then we shifted to an auction model. Like all of a sudden the monetization took off and it became really valuable. And then I guess another milestone was buying Trulia, which was a main competitor. And then we did 17 acquisitions over the next 5 or 10 years. So anyway, those are a couple important milestones.
So I'm glad you actually mentioned as far as the acquisitions, right, later on with Trulia. So could you maybe share more around that and just kind of like how that I guess kind of fit within the strategy of Zillow?
Buying Trulia was really instrumental because we were the number 1 site, they were the number 2 site, and we paid a couple billion. I think it was an all stock deal, 2/3, 1/3 all stock. So we gave them about $2 billion of stock in Zillow. But the reason that it was so important was it allowed us to shift the monetization model from a fixed price lead gen business to an auction lead gen business. So we always wanted to be like what Google was in search. And the genius of Google is, from a consumer standpoint, the genius of Google is that it's a really good search engine. From the advertising standpoint, the genius of Google is the auction. And, when the CPCs for Los Angeles real estate are $4 CPCs, Zillow doesn't get mad at Google. Zillow gets mad at the other competitors that bid the auction up to $4 CPCs. So nobody blames the auctioneer. And so we always wanted to switch our ad model from a fixed price where we were calling the real estate agent saying, sorry, there's a price increase. It's now $100 a month or $120 a month, or we were CPC, CPL, CPA, which all sorts of different business models, but we were always increasing the price as our traffic grew. And that's a really hard conversation. It drives churn. So we wanted to shift to an auction. Buying Trulia allowed us to have enough scale and take out a main competitor that allowed us to create auction dynamics, which is why the Google auction works, because they have 90% market share in search. We spent 10 months arguing with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, that it wasn't going to create a monopoly. I believed it wasn't going to I still believe it didn't create a monopoly. I mean, there's plenty of real estate search engines and plenty of places for real estate agents to advertise. So it's not a monopoly. And that's why eventually the government agreed with us, but it took 10 months and I think 26 trips to Washington and hundreds and hundreds of hours under oath. And it was a complicated transaction to get approved, but when we did, it was instrumental in the company's growth. Actually, there's a good lesson here for you, which is, if any of you think that you will ever, almost no matter what you do, anything that you write in Slack, in text, in WhatsApp, in email, you should assume will eventually be discoverable in a lawsuit, in a antitrust hearing, in a whatever. And the lawyers call the things that you wish you hadn't written, they call them bad docs. Do you have any bad docs? And like, we had some bad docs. We had a binder. It's probably still here somewhere. actually it's right there, of like thousands and thousands of papers, of email and Slack messages stuff. And under oath in front of the FTC, they'd be like, well, 3 years ago, there was some board meeting or something where you talked about how Trulia was a competitor and they had this percent market, like everything you write will eventually come out. And there were a couple things that I wish it wasn't that bad, but like I'd called some of my competitors internally some names and said, people were, said some bad things about some people, which then I had to apologize for. So that wasn't great. But mostly from a business standpoint, you just want to make sure that you never write anything like, oh gosh, if we could ever merge with company X, then we would finally have a monopoly and we could charge whatever we want. Like, don't write that. You'll regret that. I didn't actually. We didn't have anything that egregious, but that's the type of thing you want to be thoughtful about.
And that's a good tip for founders here. So you did you also mentioned that this point as far as like legal and regulatory, right? And I feel like as marketplaces, and especially being early in kind of spaces, disrupting an industry, kind of bringing change. Maybe do you have any tips for founders, building and as far as how they could think about kind of legal and regulatory?
Especially if you're in a regulated industry, but even if you're not, I think it's really important that you have a good read on where regulatory is going in your space. In the case of residential real estate, it's in the midst of a massive, massive change. You've probably read about it. I've been talking about this for 2 years. Everyone was sort of ignoring me until a month ago. And now everybody's finally aware of it. There's a class action lawsuit underway, which actually was just decided. And the plaintiffs were given $5.2 billion of damages. And it will, once all the dust settles and the other copycat lawsuits work their way through the system and the appeals work their way through the system, it will probably result in the U.S. real estate industry structure completely changing and looking a lot more like Europe and the UK, whereby the buyer's agent's commission is decoupled from the listing agent's commission. And that has huge implications for every part of the real estate ecosystem. And for those that were paying attention, this was pretty obvious 2 years ago. It was obvious to me 2 years ago that this is where it was going to end up. I frankly wish I'm not involved in Zillow anymore. I have tons of startup investments in and around the space, including a couple of companies that I've incubated. I wish it's very rare, probably the only time in my career where I felt like I felt like I knew something. I knew a secret that nobody else did, but I didn't actually really benefit that much from it. So if you ever have that, you have a strong point of view about the future direction of your industry, especially if it's a contrarian point of view, finding a way to make that advantage you is really, it's really important. So you could obviously go down a rat hole and spend tons and tons of time on the regulatory stuff. In the case of Zillow, I went to DC almost every quarter for many, many years, and we had lots of lobbyists and industry experts and stuff that advised us on things. And it was important and useful, not just for the FTC approval of the Trulia deal, but for a whole host of reasons. And I continue to just pay really close attention to the regulatory environment in the industries that I'm in.
Yeah. So could you share a little bit more about, Pacaso and maybe what some of those kind of early steps that you took were to start it as a marketplace?
Yeah. So I started Pacaso with a fellow Zillow exec, and he's my co-founder and CEO. And I think our top 6 people are all from Zillow, and, the first 20 employees basically came from Zillow. And Pacaso is a Series C stage company. We raised $240 million of equity, a couple hundred employees. We are creating a new product of co-owned second homes. So we take a luxury second home in Malibu or Aspen or Tahoe or Cabo or London, and we fractionalize it and we sell it in units of 8. So you can buy 1/8 or 2/8, 3/8, 4/8. And then Pacaso does the property management for the home and we originate the mortgage. So it's a much better way to own a second home than owning all the second home yourself, because you're right sizing your ownership. You're only buying the portion of the home that you're really going to use. It's almost like carpooling, but for second home ownership. We're in 40 markets in 4 countries. We just crossed about $1 billion of real estate sales in our 3rd year. Lessons learned so far. I guess the 0 to 1 sort of finding product market fit, you're never really done. Like, we found really early product market fit at Pacaso, especially during the COVID quarantine when people wanted a second home. And then people went back to work and they didn't need second homes as much. And then we had to sort of find our way again. And then mortgage rates went way up. And all of a sudden people said, wait, this is a really discretionary purchase. Actually, before mortgage rates went up, interest rates went up and tech went down. And all of a sudden, a lot of our customers felt poor and said, well, I don't need a Pacaso anymore, or I don't want $1 million. Yeah, I'm buying $1 million eighth of an $8 million home is better than buying $8 million, but maybe I don't need any of that. So as interest rates went up and tech went down, we had to go find a different buyer pool outside of tech. And then as mortgage rates went up, we had to change our value prop again and find a way to convince people that they should buy a second home or a portion of a second home at 8 or 9% mortgage rates. So like we've had 3 or 4 different product market fit iterations. We did our, we did our layoff. We kind of had a lot of the same, it wasn't quite as dire as the Hotwire 9/11 story. I kind of glossed over the Zillow financial crisis story, but trust me that 2008 was a difficult time at Zillow as well, through the financial crisis and the mortgage meltdown and the real estate meltdown, where we had our the same similar challenges to what Hotwire had in 9/11. So by the way, Mike, this is three for three. Companies I start 2 years later, there's a global catastrophe that my industry, travel, real estate, and then real estate again, is right at the center of terrorism, financial meltdown, mortgage meltdown, and then mortgage rate increase, which caused a huge slowdown. So I'm very unlucky in that sense, but in each of the 3 cases, I've sort of managed to navigate through. So anyway, that's Pacaso, and we've had a couple great quarters now. So I think we're back on our front foot.
So I guess is it more of an asset kind of heavy marketplace, or are you actually buying the homes? Or?
So it's a good question. When things go well, it's not asset heavy. We take a home that's on the market or not on the market, we put it under contract, and we basically pre-aggregate demand, and we sell through it such that at the time of closing we didn't have to buy it. Doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we have like 3/8 or 4/8 or 5/8 spoken for, and then we buy the rest and we own the stub for the next couple months, or sometimes next couple quarters if things don't work out the way they're supposed to. So it's supposed to be asset light. It's not always asset light. And that's a constant struggle of ours to try to become more asset light by pre-aggregating demand more.
So you have some awesome experience, of course, in the real estate and housing markets with Zillow and Pacaso, now, and also investing in them as well. So what do you think some of the biggest mistakes that you see with founders are that they make when they're building in kind of real estate and housing?
I mean, there are 2 things that I have been seeing startup pitches, I guess 3, over and over and over and over again, that always try and fail in the real estate space. One is the interior design thing, the take a picture of a room and then swipe to change furniture. So like the, kind of democratizing access to interior design. I've invested in a couple of those. Zillow invested in a couple of those. They've all failed over and over and over again. The second one is lowering commissions overall. And maybe this is the right time for it because the industry changes, the regulatory changes I mentioned, but there have been a zillion startups that have been like, I went to buy my first home at 27 and it pissed me off that I had to pay 3% or 6% or whatever, and I'm going to democratize access to real estate with lower commissions. Zillow does not do that, by the way. Like Zillow actually, people think Zillow is a disruptor. Zillow's not really a disruptor. Zillow actually is a leech that sits on top of the commission pool and just sort of siphons off ad budgets away from agents that otherwise would have gone to newspapers. So the true disruptors in the real estate space have failed over and over and over again because the cartel is really strong and has made it difficult for commissions to erode. Now might be the time, perhaps, but I've seen a million startups try and fail. And then I guess the third one is not really directly in real estate, but it's kind of more in like prop tech, broadly speaking, which is the sort of short-term rental, like we're building a business, we're building a brand on top of Airbnb. So we're property managing hundreds of short-term rental homes, or we're buying them, or we have a PropCo-OpCo structure. But basically, we're going to be like Hilton Hotels is to the hotel industry. We're going to be on top of short-term rentals. And there's a lot of venture capital that's gone into startups there. Most of those companies have failed. I've invested in several of them. So, I mean, each of those 3 ideas are good ideas. it'll happen eventually, but like, gosh, there's a lot of startup blood on the battlefield from all three of those fields, so the three of those ideas.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's going to be really helpful for our founders in the community because I know we have a lot that are building in real estate and housing. So you and I could probably go on for quite some time, and I want to make sure we have time for some questions here from founders. So we're going to get to them in a second. But one of the things that I did want to ask about is when you're at this sense of kind of scale, such as like a Zillow's at, how do you think about defensibility for marketplaces where in that sense of scale?
Defensibility comes from a network effect. This is kind of interesting. Like Zillow, none of the real estate websites have network effects. So if a listing on Zillow is viewed 100 times or 1,000 times or 10,000 times, it has the same quality. In fact, that same exact listing is on Redfin and Realtor.com and on Joe the real estate agent's website and Compass website and is viewed, 5 times, 10 times. And Zillow doesn't actually have any network effects. So its moat is its brand. And that's what keeps the traffic coming back. And that is powerful. Brand can be a powerful moat, but it's not as powerful as the Uber network effect of a two-sided marketplace that a huge number of riders means it attracts a lot of drivers, which lowers the rate and lowers the wait time, and that improves the user experience in classic two-sided marketplace. Zillow doesn't actually have that. So I would argue it is more at risk of it has a smaller moat, I guess, because its moat really is brand. And in that sense, it's not a traditional two-sided marketplace moat.
Yeah. What about Pacaso? Do you think
Pacaso is trying to build a moat and network effect around a community of co-owners? So we've just built out a swapping product. For example, like I own a Pacaso in Malibu. I own 1/8 of it, which is 6 weeks a year. In the Pacaso app, I can become friends with other friends of mine that own Pacasos. And I can, if I'm not going to use all 6 of my weeks, I can give up a week or two of time in my Pacaso to stay in one of their Pacasos. So right now we have thousands of owners. It's pretty cool. I know 12 owners, and one has a Pacaso in Cabo, and one has one in London, and one has one in Aspen, and et cetera. Eventually, hopefully, we'll have hundreds of thousands of Pacaso owners, and that will be a very strong network effect. We're not quite there yet. We're still, relatively new, but that is one way that we're trying to build a network effect. We also have a network effect around brand, but obviously that's not as strong a brand as Zillow, but in the luxury co-ownership space, it's really the only brand. But again, I think brand moats are really relatively weak as compared to true network effect moats.
Cool. So we're going to get into questions here. Hey, Matt, do you want to come on?
So my question is, and I know you know this super well, real estate agents and brokers have always had a love-hate relationship with Zillow and Trulia, especially since day one, especially because of the Zestimate or key strategies, early on, especially like pre-IPO, that helped Zillow turn or diffuse these kind of real estate detractors from agents and brokers in the community in order to mitigate risks of losing supply.
It's a constant game of like carrot and stick, I guess. So I think every one of these marketplaces has challenges on the supply side. If you're Uber, you're like begging drivers to participate, and then you're fighting with them, and then you're kind of, carrot and sticking them, and then you're giving them economic incentives, and then you're saying, actually, if you don't do this, we won't let you drive anymore. So it's like the constant, you're like training a pet, and showing them love and then showing them discipline, kind of, back and forth. And so that's how Zillow sort of tries to handle it. A lot of the lessons that a lot of the when I was running Zillow, I was probably more carrot than stick on this issue, and I learned that from Expedia and Hotwire, where one of the main reasons that Expedia bought Hotwire was the industry loved us. The hotel industry loved Hotwire because, as I described it, it really solved a huge problem for the travel industry, and the industry hated Expedia because Expedia was arrogant, and Expedia also extracted huge rents. They were just aggressive on commission, and they didn't really solve a business problem. They just, the travel industry would have sold through an offline travel agent, paid them a 10% commission, and now they're selling through Expedia and paying them a 15 to 20% commission. So how is this better? I learned the importance of embracing the industry. So when I was running Zillow, we had a real, and I think you probably remember this, a real active strategy around engagement with the industry, going to conferences, doing webinars, creating advisory boards, bestowing awards on industry people, kissing ass. And I did it a lot, and I did it well. And I had a whole big team that did it well too. So every marketplace has to figure this out for themselves, but it's some combination of carrot and stick. And generally I lean towards carrot.
Hey, Spencer, I actually had a question that was added to the doc that I wanted to ask for someone. But that's with investing in marketplaces now. What are some of the things that you look for in marketplaces, and maybe even kind of like specific kind of metrics and benchmarks?
I look for big TAM, low NPS. So big total addressable market, low NPS, meaning everybody's kind of pissed off about the stuff. They don't like, they don't like how the industry works. So you're solving a real consumer problem. Obviously, I like things that try to solve things for the consumer and the professional on both sides. I like to see things where the founder has a direct connection to the problem, like the founding team really cares deeply about it. They're not so motivated by money or by some like MBA type analysis that drove them. Like I studied 27 different marketplace ideas and selected this one because it has the best industry dynamics, and it's like, no, like I want somebody who's like, I dream about this problem. I spent the last 5 years thinking about it because my mom is a whatever, or my dad is a whatever, or I grew up in this industry and I've always wanted to, whatever. I saw my parents and grandparents run a restaurant and it was always hard for them to buy supplies. And so now I'm building this two-sided marketplace with restaurant supplies on one side and restaurants on the other, because like I was put on this earth to help restaurants and small business owners, like that's better than like I learned at business school that this would be a good marketplace to create.
Hey, Christian, do you want to jump on?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. And really appreciate the time here, Spencer. So I'm an SEO by background. And the question that's always been on my mind is, why do companies so poorly invest in it? And I've got my own speculation about that. And I think it's to do with ROI and incremental investment per quarter. Apologies, it's a very niche question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I love the question. I just spent half hour on this topic yesterday at Pacaso, where I said to my co-founder and CEO, I said, it's been a couple months since I've heard anybody say SEO. Like I sit in these meetings, I'm in exec meetings, I'm not day-to-day, I'm chair and founder, but nobody's talking about SEO. And I literally just talked about this yesterday. And another startup this morning, same conversation. So it's a great question. Zillow was good at SEO, kind of like B+, like, yeah, we sort of knew it was important. But once we bought Trulia, we were like, holy shit, now I get it. And Trulia, total credit to Pete and Sami, co-founders of Trulia, especially Pete. Pete, the CEO and founder, was basically like the PM for SEO at Trulia. He is personally one of the world's leading experts on SEO, and invested and like learned everything he needs to learn, and it built it into the whole culture of the company. I'll tell you why companies don't invest enough in SEO. It's partly what you said, which is it takes a year or two to see results, but it's mostly that it's just it's not sexy, fun work. Like building new features is much sexier, and shipping a new shiny feature versus building a link, breadcrumbs and a link tree and new landing pages and better perf. I mean, let's face it, all that stuff is kind of boring. I know it's interesting to you, but like, it's not, and actually we did a thing at Zillow after we bought Trulia, I was like, okay, we got to get serious about SEO across the Zillow brand, not just Trulia brand. we were a persona-driven company. So we had Beth, the buyer, Susan, the seller, Harriet, the homeowner, Alan, the agent, Larry, the lender, Bob, the builder. So you walk around Zillow and there are posters to this day. Well, it's mostly remote now, but in the empty office space with like tumbleweeds rolling through, there are posters on the walls of these personas. And we created a new persona, which was Googlebot. And we made it a little picture, like a Android-y kind of, Google face thing. And we put these little like index card things behind everyone's desk that was like, I am Googlebot, you are designing for me, like blah, blah, blah. And it was like, it took 6 months to convince the product teams that it was like that building for Googlebot was good. Like that was the way to get if you're an engineer, you're a PM, you're a designer, you want your code and your feature to be viewed by many tens of millions more people, then you need better SEO and you should care about this stuff. And it required a heavy lift culturally to get people serious about it. And even at Pacaso, starting from scratch again, in 2020, with a team from Zillow. And I still would give us like a B+, maybe A- in terms of like really caring about SEO and building it into the inner workings of the company. So it's hard, but boy, is it important.
Thanks. Very validating. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on?
So my question is about why don't we see auctions as a price discovery mechanism in the U.S. residential real estate, kind of outside of like kind of the foreclosure or maybe the luxury part of the market, seem commonly used abroad, and it seems like the ideal solution for kind of idiosyncratic inventory markets like the Bay Area where ML doesn't work.
It's a great question, and actually, this is where Zillow started. This is like a little known fact deep in the vault. In that period of time when we're like, okay, we should figure out what everybody else is worth, we're like, well, actually, the best way to figure out what a house is worth is to run an auction. Maybe we should create an auction website. And I almost never talk about this publicly, but you could maybe find something on the web somewhere about it. I probably mentioned it on a podcast or something. Homeauctionweb.com was the very first version of Zillow, which we launched with that URL intentionally as a brand that nobody would pay attention to. And we auctioned one house. And, it was a Seattle house. We readied the home for sale. We put the pictures online. We put it in the MLS, blah, blah, blah. And the original business plan for Zillow was to be an online brokerage that sold through auctions. We listened to all these Australian auctions online on like online radio and then streaming and really went deep on different auction models in Australia, where most homes are auctioned in Australia, as it sounds like and we concluded at the end of that 3-month kind of diversion that the US just isn't ready for auctions, that the stigma is that there was some drug deal that went down on the house, or it's a foreclosure, or something weird is wrong with it. And while it kind of makes sense intellectually for price discovery and buyers and sellers meeting in the middle and blah, 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 all the reasons why it academically makes sense, like we're just not there culturally, and it is what it is. And this new company at the time with no traffic wasn't going to move the needle. Maybe if today Zillow launched an auction product, could maybe it get traction, maybe. But like, it's just cultural stigma is kind of why we moved away from the idea. But we spent months thinking about it.
Thank you.
So we're almost out of time here, Spencer. But wow, this is such a great chat to dive into some of your awesome experience and insights and also learnings too. So we appreciate taking the time to join us here today. I actually had one last question for you before we wrap things up, though. And that's if you could go right back to before you started Hotwire and entered the world of marketplaces. What would you tell yourself about marketplaces specifically?
Well, it sounds like you guys have talked about it, but I'd read Andrew Shen's book, which is probably behind me. I think Cold Start Problem is a genius work. It's much more articulate than I ever could, all of these topics. So that's a gold mine. I don't know. I would just try to solve a problem that I was really passionate about. That's one thing that found each of these startup experiences, especially Pacaso, like I truly am passionate about second home ownership. I've owned a second home for the last 15 years. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household where my parents owned a second home, and it was life-changing. It just, like, the relationship with my parents and my siblings and friends and family has been enriched endlessly through second home ownership. And so I truly believe in the importance and the value of second home ownership, and I just really want to try to make it more accessible to more people. So I'm totally connected to that mission of creating that marketplace. I also think, as I mentioned, there are a lot of pseudo marketplaces that are not really marketplaces, like that are kind of more like classified businesses. And Zillow is a really good example, that are maybe more disruptible than one might think. So, true marketplace has moat, has participants on both sides, and moat. Not all big brands have moats.
Yeah, those are great last tips, and things that we're always discussing here as well. So, and then last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
I'm on all the socials, but my website is 75andsunny.vc. That's my family office that invests in startups. And then .la and LinkedIn. I publish a lot on LinkedIn or on .la. So those of you that live in LA, you should subscribe to .la, .la, which publishes news and information on the funding environment and startups here in LA Tech.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for joining in. The great questions too.